Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us writing a comment. In this episode, we're going to talk about the players versus stats. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix. Welcome to that episode of Just One More Fix. So, I don't really need to lead into that, I guess, but, well, as we are recording this is the Monday before Gen Con, so we are leading up and being very excited for Gen Con. So I know we've announced it several times, but if you haven't noticed, we will actually be recording episode 50 at Gen Con 50, which I wish that I could have said that I planned that out back in last September, but I am in fact not that crafty. And it's just an awesome coincidence. So we will be at Gen Con this year. I believe everyone that is on the podcast will actually be there. So there's going to be some things we're going to do. We have some swag to give away, some Just One More Fix badge ribbons, some Just One More Fix badge ribbons, and some other things to give away at the convention. So if you aren't a member of our Facebook group, or you don't follow us on Twitter, you should hop on there and do those two things, or one of the other, I guess, depending on
do both,
which platform you're on or whatever.
We demand 100% commitment.
There you go. And follow us on there, because if you're going to be at the con, we will be there, and we're going to make some announcements on there, possibly some giveaways. And then if you guys are interested in some Just One More Fix swag, I guess, I'm looking forward to a good convention this year. So if you're going to be at Gen Con, we look forward to seeing any of you that are going to be there. We may do a meetup thing on one of the days and maybe have a few drinks and meet some people that, I guess, enjoy listening to us blather on for too long about RPGs or whatever. And
also, we will be giving away tons of free handshakes, so get in on that.
Right on. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else we have announcements about Gen Con?
About Gen Con, no.
I'm not sure. We're gonna record episode 50 at Gen Con, so you might get 2 episodes this week. This one will drop on Wednesday on the normal day, and depending on how things go with the Gen Con recording, we may actually just drop that one on Friday for the people that are actually at Gen Con to enjoy. And for those of you that can't make it to Gen Con, well, I guess over the weekend you could get some enjoyment of our experience at Gen Con. I don't know however that's gonna work, but I also plan we'll probably mention some awesome things to check out at Gen Con this year. So if we stumble into some things that are awesome that you haven't seen yet,
it probably won't happen.
What?
Stumbling into anything awesome at Gen Con?
Yeah, definitely not. Well, I'm not stumbling anywhere. We're going to find it all. It will be sought out and examined. So that's all enough about Gen Con. And in case you don't follow our Twitter feed, we also just shared something that Lacey found.
Oh my God, my nerd brain just exploded. So Neil Gaiman, Terry Pratchett, and David Tennant all together on one project. I know what you're thinking. Terry Pratchett is dead, but his books live on.
Right.
And Good Omens, the TV series, just announced some of the casting. And David Tennant is going to be Aleister Crowley.
Crawley,
sorry.
No,
David
yeah.
Tennant's going to be Crawley.
It starts off Crawley, and he doesn't like Crawley. It's a great book. If you haven't read Good Omens, you need to go read Good Omens, because
it is amazing.
Yeah, it's a great book, and Terry Pratchett is awesome. So is Neil Gaiman.
Just picture school-aged Antichrist being
right.
sought after by head angel and head demon, and really, there you go. Who does not want to read that?
Yes, satire and drama ensue. Right on. Do you have any other announcements? I don't think I have anything.
I can't think of anything that could possibly be more important than that.
True. Gen Con.
Oh, I don't know. It's a close one.
Nope, Gen Con. All right. Anyway, so, well, as you heard, we're going to talk about players versus stats today. So, several episodes we talked about players versus meta and how that works, right? So this is kind of something that came up in some discussions that we had about more players versus statistics, in that what happens when you have a player.
Okay. Can I?
Okay, go for it. You set it up.
Okay.
You set it up.
So back when you guys did a LARP episode without me, I took the time to listen to that podcast since I wasn't on it. I don't really enjoy listening to myself talk later. It's kind of weird.
Right.
Anyhow, so I was just thinking about previous LARP experiences and how sometimes you can kind of cheat the system when it comes to social encounters because you're just you when you're acting things out. So maybe you're really good at social interaction in the real life, but on your character sheet, not so much, and how that can be misconstrued.
So you can kind of fudge the numbers and get away with
you can
things.
kind of misrepresent your stats by just being an awesome actor. And whether that's fair, whether it's not, it got me thinking about some other times when maybe statistics don't really represent what you want. So we always talk like as with Fate, it tells you you're going to be playing exceptional characters. And that's pretty much true for any RPG game, horror being sometimes a slight exception where you might play a mundane character with no skills who's about to get murdered. But generally, you're playing somebody who is awesome because nobody wants to play Joe the desk clerk.
Ooh, NATO the RPG.
So where does that leave you when you're wanting to play Hugh Jackman from Swordfish and the only thing you really know about computers is where the on button is?
And the tech support hotline. Right. I see where you're going.
So that's our topic for today.
Right on. All right. So in my mind, when I kind of thought about this when you brought it up, I don't know if it's my mind immediately went to the White Wolf side of things with the breakup, as you guys have heard the last couple episodes we've recorded, with the physical, social, mental, right? And that's just how World of Darkness games are broken up. But I also think it's an easy way to break things up because it's just sort of three broad categories that apply to almost every RPG there is, right? So in the physical sense, well, let me back up. I guess let's talk about the difference between tabletop and LARP, okay? Because there's a pretty significant difference, and I think we're going to focus mainly on tabletop stuff because I think it's more immediately relevant to what we're talking about here. But you are very right because I'm very outspoken. I'm an alpha gamer. I'm just one of those people that I'm a type A personality, and I've been a project manager for a lot of different things. So I'm large and in charge, and that's just who I am, right? And I do know in the past in some Mind's Eye Theater games that I've played in where I made characters that weren't necessarily, the social thing wasn't their forte, but it is my forte personally, right? Now, I wouldn't say that it changed the character I was playing, but when a situation gets heated and you want to get involved and you're talking to people and playing politics and trying to position yourself and maneuver yourself into positions to have leverage over people or whatever, or get what you want, the statistics aren't necessarily coming into play in that situation. It's more the role playing and the characterization and the individual player. And when we got to talking about this, it really does feel unfair in some cases.
Right. So if you're coming from a corner of the world where social interaction is maybe a little bit awkward for you, I don't feel like that should exclude you from the LARP circle, but it's definitely going to put you at a disadvantage.
So how do you mitigate that? Right. And I think in the specifically the Mind's Eye Theater sense, because in a lot of other LARPs, they're not quite as social interaction important in that, like the politics of it is what I'm saying, right? Jockeying for favors and position and status, right? So I don't know that there's a good way to mitigate it in those in those settings and like in that game style, right? Because so much of it hinges on that, and unless you arbitrate the like storytellers or narrators running around to make sure that everybody is on board with you're acting like a 3 social character and not a 7,
right,
which is just logistically not a reality.
In LARP in general, you're relying much more on your players not to be metagaming douchebags, basically.
And for the most part, it's not a problem because everyone is there to have a good time and have a good story. So it's not an issue. I think it's much harder and a much larger problem to tackle and deal with. And I don't even know that I have a solution. It would be something to have to sit down and really think on. But I think that's why I want to focus more on the tabletop side of this thing because
and you have just in general more tabletop gamers than LARPers.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. But it's something I totally want to come back to because there are a lot of Mind's Eye Theater players out there, and with Vampire 5th Edition coming out, next year, I'm sure there's going to be even more Mind's Eye Theater stuff coming around again. So I think it is something I definitely want to come back to because I think it's a different style of conversation and argument to have for as far as solutions go. But when it comes to the social side of things, it's still very relevant to tabletop, right? It's just that I think it's easier to manage because there's less people around, less people involved in the game, and everyone's at the table with the game master or storyteller.
You're all here in one spot and you're not going anywhere.
Right. Where I came down on this and I started thinking was you have like in my situation, right? I have, we'll just call it high social skills or whatever, right? In dealing in characterization stuff, right? In role play. But if I have a character with low
social
stats, right? How do you mitigate that? And it's really easy to, in a lot of games, they have this thing where if you make a good argument or role play well, then you get a bonus to your role, which is easy for some people to get.
Mhm.
So are you really being penalized for having low social stats when you can achieve that bonus consistently? Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So what do you think? Do you have a solution in mind for this specific case? You know what I'm saying? You know?
You mean when you're talking about experience gained through role playing in game?
No, I'm talking about where I'm going to make a social role to convince you. Like we're having a conversation with an NPC, okay? And I'm trying to convince him to lend me help on this political project or whatever it is, right? Now, let's say I have only, a couple dots in my social skills and a couple dots in my social abilities in the World of Darkness sense of things, right? So I'm only rolling, we'll say 4 dice, just pretend, right? But when I make my argument to you as a storyteller and through role play, I do a good job of my argument, and we have some good role play that happens, and you say, okay, that was good. We'll give you a bonus for this scene, for this role, because of the role playing and your argument and all this kind of stuff that happened.
Do you have a particular system in mind that gives you a bonus based on actual scenes as opposed to like an XP bonus at the end of the game for role playing?
Most of them actually talk about, I couldn't think of any right off the top of my head but I do know almost all of them talk about if there's an exceptional moment through role play that happened. 7th Sea does. The first time you use a skill in a scene, you get plus 1 die. If you make a great argument or a great descriptor that goes with it, you get plus 2. Right. So there's an example, and I know there are several others, that do something along the same lines. So if you have good role play and you're experienced in that kind of thing, it's an easy bonus to achieve.
I think it's a difficult question because you don't want to ever discourage role playing. And I feel like if you penalize them by not giving them that bonus, then you're kind of saying, well, it doesn't matter at all.
Right.
And I think really the best thing to do is to be as true to the system that you're playing as possible, because some systems don't have that, right?
Right.
But the basic argument here is that the stats should be informing your role playing. So if you make your role, maybe you do a great job explaining it, so you get your plus 2 bonus. But if that's still not enough for you to overcome the obstacle, then I feel like you should have to role play some kind of whatever social guffaw or something that happens that makes the rest of your fantastic argument irrelevant.
Okay.
And then,
it's a hard question.
It is a hard question, but I just, especially when it comes to the social thing, it's almost,
I think it's because the social
it's almost an unfair advantage, even more so, not just to people that are not very socially adept, but also to new players that just may not be as comfortable with the role playing as other older players are. And I just, in 7th Sea, it's all about flair and dramatics. And I get that. And I love how the system informs the drama for that game. But I think just to bear it in mind, and maybe your expectation is different then. So maybe if I know that you're always going to deliver me an excellent bit of role playing in your social interaction, then perhaps my expectation for you that grants you that plus 2 bonus is different than my other player who is not as vocal.
That's immediately where I was going to go to see what you thought is it okay to have 2 different standards at the table? So we have one person who is more of an introverted player, and we have one person who's more of an extroverted player. So do we have one standard that says for the different types of role play? Because if this person is a very introverted style player and isn't outspoken that way, but when they do step up and they make an effort that way, is it in your mind, if you are running the game, I guess on both sides of it, if you were running or playing, do you feel like you would be cheated if you were a player that wasn't receiving that bonus for something that you felt like was larger than what they did? I mean, not to dig into this too much, because as long as everyone around the table is having fun, I think it's okay.
I would really like to say no, but I would probably be a little salty about it if I'm being perfectly honest. If I knew that my role playing was better than the person next to me, especially if I didn't know them and didn't know how long they would been gaming or what have you, then yeah, I would probably be a little bit upset if they got a bonus and I didn't when my role playing was better than theirs.
Okay.
So I don't, like I said, I don't know that I really have a good answer for the question.
So,
But I feel like that's a small aspect of what we're talking about, though.
right. Well, let me, I guess, to kind of wrap this around. In my mind, running the games and on the player side of things, I feel like all of this is a learned skill in a lot of ways, just like being an actor is a learned skill, and that's quite a bit of what happens in a role playing session, right? There's putting yourself in the headspace of your character and role playing that out, right? Well, I think that is very definitely a learned skill and a muscle that you can exercise and get better at. And I don't think that there's anything wrong if you have a player at the table who's maybe they don't get into the role playing aspect of it quite as much because of experience or anxiety of doing it or whatever reason it is. But if you're able to coax that out of them through the game that you're running, I don't think that there's anything wrong with rewarding them in ways that you might have a lower expectation or whatever to get those rewards, with the idea that as they do it and they get more experience and they get better out of it, especially for your newer players, right, to kind of draw that out of them and encourage it, and then by them exercising that muscle or that, gaining that skill, that eventually they would kind of come up to where maybe everybody else is or whatever the situation.
I will say that bonus XP that is given at the end of some games for role playing, for like 7C gives one for best role playing.
Most dramatic, yes.
Whenever we did LARPs, there was always an experience point given out by the storyteller at the end to best role play, and it was usually by like a group. The group would nominate, and then the storyteller would have sort of final say in who that experience point went to. I never felt like cheated when I didn't get that role playing point, but it always was like, okay, well, like next game, I'm gonna do something like really
epic.
awesome.
Right.
So it was more like of a motivating factor for me, not being as role playing savvy necessarily. I'm much more of a brain person than social interaction generally. So I found it to be more motivating than penalizing.
Okay. So are there anything else I think we kind of like talked around that one pretty good and have the bow on that one, I guess you might say. Is there anything else in the social realm that you're thinking of where this would apply in a different kind of a way?
The one that always got me in LARP especially was lying. That's the easiest one to point to. Right. Some people are very good liars and some people Bluffing are really very not. Yeah. And that is an easy thing to pick up on in a social interaction, and it's not always informed by the dots. So it's not, I don't even know if is it listed as a social skill or does it go off of a mental thing, your subterfuge? It
would be manipulation plus subterfuge.
Okay. So,
and then for them to realize
it's a social skill.
Would be either wits or perception plus empathy or subterfuge.
That the bluff in LARP is a very important thing. Yeah. And I feel like that is probably something that's not recognized enough. So for example, Lee is a much better liar than Carrie. And maybe Carrie has 3 dots in subterfuge and 4 in manipulation, and maybe Lee has 1 dot in subterfuge.
So I think
to even recognize it. And that's something as a human, I may not even know to call for a test or to ask about because how do you do that? And I feel like it's the same for tabletop as well. Like subterfuge is a skill.
In a tabletop situation, I think it's easier to deal with because in a tabletop situation, generally what happens is there's a role, an opposed roll it's made of some kind, no matter what system you're playing in, whether that's a sense motive and bluff check in a D&D sense, or if it's a empathy versus subterfuge or whatever it is. The easiest way in that situation is to just adjudicate it with a roll, but the consequences are much different in that sense than they are in LARP, and I think that's a totally different discussion there. But the example is 100% correct in what you're saying.
I feel like that's one of the biggest social, probably that and like leadership are probably the two most important social skills
think about leadership,
that you're using in a role-playing setting.
Okay,
so manipulating people and getting them to follow you. Those are 2 pretty big important things.
The easiest way with the manipulation and lying and bluffing thing, I think, is just straight up opposed roll. And most of the time in tabletop settings, I don't think we've ever had a situation where people didn't call for it. Do you know what I mean? Can I tell if he's lying? Well, let's just have a roll. Or in some systems like in Gumshoe, right? Trail of Cthulhu or Knights Black Agents, you just spend the points essentially, depending on the interpersonal investigative skill to be like, he is trying to hide something, or this is what he's trying to hide, right?
So if your player is not picking up on that, then you think as a GM, you should automatically say, you have this
Well-
subterfuge skill, do you want to roll that? Because then that almost builds
Okay.
in the suspicion that might not have been there before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's the same thing of, I guess it's almost along the same lines of you're walking through a dungeon. Do you need to roll check traps every 10 feet, or do you just want to have them do it when they
Yes,
get to
you
the
do.
trap?
Because
That's
if you're doing that, you're playing D&D.
Terribly
and you
awful.
should
That's painful. But it's kind of along the same thing. So like, do you need to have them roll to check for subterfuge? Everything, and I think no. But if you're playing in a game where there's a lot of manipulation and lying and bluffing, right? Unless it's a new player. If it's a new player, I think it's okay to prompt them and be like, hey, this would be a good situation for you to use your subterfuge, or do you have subterfuge, kind of a thing, or do you have empathy, whatever the situation might call for, and prompt them that way. But if it's an experienced player or maybe not like a veteran player, but like someone who's used to the system, the mechanics of the system, and it may not even be a role-playing experience. Maybe it's a system-specific thing, right? They don't know how these different pieces of the game work together. If that's the case, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, you have some subterfuge, or just saying, do you have subterfuge, and prompting that roll. But I think you're right. If he's not lying and you ask for it, they're immediately going to be like, must not have rolled good enough in the back of their mind. Right. So
as a good player, you try and shut that off as much as you can, but
it always lingers back there.
You can't unthink the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you just prompt them for the roll in that case. And then once you've done that a few times, in my mind, if I'm playing a new system and I don't know how it works and the game master prompts me for that, I know in the future that's something I need to keep in my mind, and that obviously there are some people who are, they're lying backstabbers or whatever it is, and I need to make sure I'm paying attention for that. And that would probably go along with setting the expectations for the players that this is a game about deceit and whatever, and that's a potential here.
So then that kind of leads me into a question. It's easy to see where if the physical stats, we pretty much always make people roll for them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of complaints with games is that when they feel too crunchy is because people get bogged down in the combat because of all of those rolls that are happening. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to lose your role playing to these constant skill rolls for social and mental checks as well. So is it okay to gloss over those rolls? And if you do that, can you just say, okay, this character has a subterfuge of 3, so I can assume that he succeeds on checks when he's lying to NPCs of this level, or I can assume he's able to detect that this NPC is lying because he's skilled at that. Is that okay or no?
I think it just depends on how quickly you want the game to move along. I think the comparison to combat is a fair comparison, but in most systems, the mechanics that exist within the combat side of things are much larger than in the social combat sense, so that if I'm trying to lie to you, it's generally just one roll, right? And you're like, okay, unless you want to get down into some finer points, or maybe we have a discussion. Is that a lie? Okay, like maybe it's an interrogation. That's probably the best example, okay? And you could break it down in a couple different rolls, right? Whereas that might take a little bit longer, but I still wouldn't think that would take as long as a combat would. Right. So I don't think that in most systems you're going to get too bogged down by a couple rolls. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
At the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying if you have 5 in subterfuge, that any NPC that you run into that is lying to you, I might just give it to you and say that this guy, maybe you don't know, you can tell he's being deceptive or whatever.
Right, exactly. Like this man seems like he's not telling you the whole truth, or this guy is bold-faced lying to you. You can at least get a feel for how that interaction is going.
If it's player against player, I don't ever think that's appropriate, because I think you're taking away some player agency in that case.
Right.
Or also if it's player versus like villain, in the idea that you have multiple levels of bad guy. If it's just city guards, who cares, right?
Right.
But if it's the big bad of the adventure, or your nemesis, I think it's important to have roles there, because through some of those roles, and you can have some great role playing and great plot twists that happen, right? And also those roles are, when things kind of go funny, like they have tendency to do with dice, it can create some fun situations for the game master to play off of, and maybe divert the plot in some funny ways, or maybe not so funny, but even dramatic ways, because of things that happen through gameplay and adapting your story.
I do think it's interesting, though, that for most systems, it is okay to gloss over those minor interactions when it comes to social and mental checks, but it's not okay for physical checks. So if I'm we just watched Game of Thrones. If I'm invading the castle and I'm lying to the gold cloaks, maybe I don't have to roll for that. But if I'm trying to lie to Cersei Lannister, then I'm going to have to roll for that. So then why is it not okay in a physical combat to be like, okay, well, I bested these gold cloaks. We can just gloss over that. But now I'm facing Jaime Lannister on the battlefield and I have to roll for it.
Okay, I think
so where does it...
It's a matter
where do you draw the line?
It's a matter of consequence. So in your example, if there is massive consequence to this fight with the gold cloaks, right? Then I think you roll that out.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. You almost never gloss over a physical combat. It doesn't happen. You're killing all the goblins and you're rolling to kill each individual goblin.
Okay, I think, well, in the Dungeons and Dragons sense, I agree with you. But in some of the other systems, 7th Sea being our example before, right? When you're a hero and you're running away to try and escape, let's use your Gold Cloaks example, right? You're running away to flee King's Landing, right? Or whatever the 7th Sea equivalent would be. And you're running away and you're running through the streets. And at the city gate, there are a batch of city guards that are there to stop you. Well, that's what, a brute squad, maybe 2. So if you have any competence with the sword, it's going to be some daring and dashing and knocking out some henchmen, and then you're on the way. And I think that in that style of game, that adds adventure and drama as opposed to adding crunch, like in a D&D sense. Right. So I think it depends on what you're looking to get out of your game.
I think the 7th Sea system is the exception and not the rule when you're making that example.
Okay, so let's go with a different example.
It is uniquely unique.
Right, fair enough. And I agree because of the way it's designed for high adventure and drama. So let's go back to our World of Darkness example then, right?
Okay.
And it actually talks about it in some of the points where you have a lot of dots. A lot of your dice pool is huge, right? The users may not even be a need to roll. You can just say, on average, if the difficulty is 6, I'm rolling 12 dice. I'm going to get 6 successes, statistically speaking, right? So I don't think there's anything wrong if you, same exact situation now, I'm a Brujah, right? And I'm trying to escape the city, escape to get out of the city because I've been blood hunted, and the mortal guards are there to stop me. Well, I mean, how much of a gore fest do I really want to make this is what the real question becomes. Do I want to activate for all my celerity, all my potence, and just have a total bloodbath? Okay, fair enough. Spend the blood and do it. You may not need to roll that situation up because it's a foregone conclusion what's going to happen. Now, if it's a long drawn out thing, right? I'm in the middle of the city and I've got to get all the way out. Now it becomes more of a thing of my resource pool of blood. How much am I going to spend and where am I going to spend it? And that's a different situation. But I think in that one small spot, explosion of gore and escape, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, okay, if you spend to activate your celerity and potence, you can tell me what happens to these guards. How much of a mess do you want to make this? And then let it go.
Okay, that's fair.
Because especially with World of Darkness, and if you go to some of the earlier editions where you're rolling to attack and to soak and to damage, like that can get bogged down like in a 3rd edition kind of way of bogging down, which is no fun,
Right.
I think it just depends on the consequences, because at the same time, if you're just lying to the Gold Cloaks, that's a lot different than lying to Cersei Lannister, right? The consequences there. If you've gotten to the point where you're in front of Cersei and you're going to lie to her, well, you better have your story together, because there's serious consequences.
My only point was in a lot of systems, you're always rolling for Cersei and Jaime, but in a lot of systems, you're rolling for the physical combat with the Gold Cloaks, but you're not rolling the other mental and social stats in those interactions, which is kind of cheating your players that are putting those dots in social and mental, because why bother?
So I guess an example of this would be Burning Wheel or Mouse Guard, right? So they have the full-on duel of wits where this is like a social combat, right? We're having a large argument, or you have where it's just one single check where I'm going to roll my oratory versus whatever. And I think that directly comes back to consequences. So if it's a minor thing with the guards, right, that's probably just one check. But if it's an argument in front of the court for favor with the local political establishment, that's a full-on duel of wits. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Cool. All right, so I think does that cover all the social aspects of everything, basically? Is there anything else that you can come up with?
I think we hit the highlights.
Okay. So the other one, physical, I don't think is an issue at a tabletop game, because we go around the table. I describe my character as being this giant burly guy. He's imposing, huge burly beard. He's this dwarf.
But he can't punch his way out of a wet paper
There you go. You stole my line. But I think that everybody is on the level and able to make that conceit, and there's no issues that happen that way. If I'm not a very giant guy. I'm tall, but I'm not like imposing physically, right? But if I describe my guy as being like Conan-esque, people just say, "Oh yeah, okay, I got it," and we move on. Now, mental is another area. Mental skills and technical ability or medical ability is another area where it can get pretty deep in the weeds in the same way that the social stuff does.
Right. We had a Firefly game, which was a lot of fun, and I played a mechanic on a spaceship. So probably, I'm not going to say I'm totally inept in the mechanical world when it comes to fixing and repairing things. Like I would know not to go looking for a left-handed hammer,
Right.
But at the same time, I don't have a lot of mechanical skills when it would come to like fixing a car. And I have even less knowledge of what makes up the components of a spaceship. I'm not like a Trekkie or anything. I haven't delved into what makes the flux capacitor work. I'm not there. And just in life in general, I'm not a highly technical person. It's not something I'm good at. But this goes back to my Hugh Jackman swordfish reference there. So you want to play somebody who's exceptional, and it's fun to play somebody who isn't you. And that oftentimes involves playing a character who has knowledge and usually great depth of knowledge in something that you may not be very good at all. So how do you role play that effectively? And the reason why I liked the Firefly game so much is because it gave you a jargon table.
Yeah.
And so when something went wrong on the ship, you would roll a set of dice and it would tell you, oh, the whatever, what's it is broken.
The grav boot on the...
The grab boot malfunction. There's the compression coil on the grab boot has sprung a leak or what have you.
Right.
You would just roll it up. And for me, it's one of those things where it's a really big sticking point because I want to make a convincing, but sometimes I don't even know where to begin. And Kurt is probably my favorite person when it comes to something like this because he will play people that are like medical professionals and he will just throw some terms out there like with a reckless abandon. And it's brilliant, but I just cannot do that. And that's why I really liked the jargon table so much because it kind of helped me give me a leg up in coming up with that.
Right. Well, there's a certain amount of I don't know, awesomeness in rolling on the table to see what had broken as well. It was kind of fun.
Yeah.
I wasn't even playing the character and I was like, oh, what's it going to be this time? Right. It was pretty fun to see. So I think that table comes from the Firefly, or I think it might be Serenity. I can't remember what the actual name of the book is, but it's similar to the Cypher system, I believe. It might be the first iteration of it. It's not the current one. It's the one before that the table was there. Now, I hope they brought it over into the newest version of the game because it was an awesome tool. And I think that is the best solution for any of it. I think whoever designed that little system or that little table hit the nail right on the head, and that is the 100% best way to do it. So no matter what field of expertise you have, and if you're the game master and you want to make this for the player, or you may just suggest it to them and say, hey, make 3 columns of terms that you look up that are relevant to whatever it is. So whether it's computers and technology or mechanics or medicine or just even scholarly stuff, just make a list of a few different terms and then roll on there. And then after you've done that enough times, it just sort of begins to just roll off the tongue.
Right. And odds are, if you are running a game, you're out there, maybe you don't want to make the table. Maybe you don't have the time. Maybe you're not even sure where to begin. But it helps narrow it down by just looking at the skills that your characters have picked. So maybe you don't have this ready to go on the first or, second or even third game. But right. By then you can kind of narrow it down as to what exactly you're going to need this for. And odds are good that there's probably already a random encounter table, so to speak, out there for the chosen skill. Sorry, I'm trying to find, there's a group that I follow on Twitter that is forever posting random like D100 tables of crap. And I was going to reference them because odds are probably pretty good that they've made a table for it or have
I think that might be a little too big when you get into the D100. But I think if you have
you get
3 columns of, say, 6 or 8 things that you can kind of terms you can combine together, I think it works great. I think it's simple. There's enough there for you to get a very definite feel for it, but not so much that it's overwhelming and you've got to spend time going through tons of, like a huge chart to find things. It's very easy. I think the one that we had was like a D6, a D8, and a D10. You roll the three dice together and you put the words together, and it will work amazingly well with anything.
It also made those skills kind of matter more too, because now when you fail at something, you're rolling to randomly see what kind of problem that you caused.
Right.
Which is exciting in its own right.
Right. And then when we would try and go on salvage missions, we had an actual thing we were looking for. It wasn't you're looking for a random engine part. It's you're actually looking for a grav boot or a
compression coil.
Exactly. And it made it a little more tangible or more real, I guess. And I thought that's the best solution I've seen. And I wouldn't even begin to suggest another solution, because I think that one fits the mold so perfectly, because it will work with any kind of technical expertise thing, from medicine all the way through any kind of scholarly stuff. If you're playing a character who's an expert in, I don't know, 17th century English literature, just look up a series of authors, make one column that is authors, one column that is story names, and one column that is like, I don't know, plot twists or something. And poof, you've got it right there. You just roll your 3 dice. Here's your things. Oh, it's Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales and the Yeoman's part of the story, or what, and that's just right there, poof, done.
Right. And the thing is, it's never really like somebody who's at the table who has intimate knowledge of that subject is like, you sound like an idiot, because that's not it. Because like I said, when I hear Kurt do it with the...
First off, if they do, just tell them to bugger off. All right? That's the first thing, is that's violating rule number 1, which is don't be a dick. So calm down. It's a game, man. Chill out.
But I know, like I said, for Kurt, when he runs like the medical characters, like I have a pretty good knowledge of the medical field.
Right.
I've been a nurse for many years now. And I've never been like, oh, well, that's not a thing, that's just silly. Or maybe I do and I chuckle, but I always appreciate that he says it with just such conviction that is the thing. And that's really all that I'm after.
Right.
Is to be able to grasp a hold of that and just throw it out there with the complete confidence and not be stumbling trying to find the right terms.
Yeah, it adds to the immersion. And I feel like it's the same thing in a movie. In the movie The Fury, right, with the tank in World War II, something goes wrong with a tank. And I spent a long time as a mechanic. Now, I'm no means a tank mechanic, but I understand the basics of a diesel engine, right? And they're like, what's going on with it? And he says something, and it's reasonably close enough to just be like, oh, yeah, that's the problem, whatever. And we move right on, because that's not the crux of the story.
Right.
If there is something that is going to break, or some technical expertise that is important to the story, well, then that does need to probably be correct for consistency in the game and in the world. But most problems, like the entire world, doesn't hinge on your grav boot. If it does, well,
according to episode.
Okay, well, that's an
just kidding. That was the compression coil.
But like in that situation, it's internally consistent with the world, right?
Right,
and it's okay. But well, like in your example with Kurt, a lot of times he'll make up some term, right? And then he'll, like, when the scene moves on, he'll be like, "Is that actually a thing?" Kind of ask, like,
those two terms both exist.
I mean, it's kind of a thing. It'll be called this, and it's more of like a gimmick, I guess, at our table sometimes, and it's something fun to do that we all enjoy. But it's not disruptive. Is the other thing I should come back to, is when those things happen, it's like that's not a thing. It's funny. We joke about it, but it's not disruptive to the overall game,
right?
And
by the same token, this isn't something that's necessary for you to play this character, but I feel like it makes the task less daunting. And so when you're talking about trying to break out of your PC norms and create something that's outside of your comfort zone, something like that just makes it easier for you to take that step and to try something new and different that's outside of your comfort zone.
Well, the other thing is, does it prevent you from stumbling along through the role play? Because it's really easy to roll those couple dice as you're talking and then consult whatever it is, because it's pretty simple. That's the idea, is so that the table is quick, so that you can just keep on moving right through the scene. And it makes it so you don't have to sit there and be bogged down in, well, I think it could. You just go right with it, and everybody at the table is on the level, and we all move right along. And
it's also much less invasive than trying to Google something on your phone while still trying to give your attention to what's going on at the game.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned maybe 3 games in, but I really think that this comes down to the players. And
I think that's fair.
If I'm running a game and you tell me this is what the character you want to do, I think it's on me to make the suggestion for you to do it. But I think that is part of the player's responsibility to come up with whatever this table is going to look like. and have these 3 columns. Now, the only thing I will say is the 3 columns, I think you should structure in a certain way so that you have, like, with the Firefly example, one of them was a component, one of them was a problem, so like broken, leaking, cracked, or whatever. And then I think the third one was another component thing, if I remember correctly. So it was like the grav boot that connects to the compressor coil is cracked, right?
I think it was actually what that was going to cause within the ship.
It was going to, the failure was, that's right. It was going to,
Which isn't always relevant if you're talking about like 17th century British literature. Like
Right.
if I identify the wrong author, like.
But all you have to do is figure out 3 categories that kind of connect to each other, right? In some way. And I've found that in our case, there was enough pieces there to make it random enough to where we didn't have a lot of repeats. It was always something new and fresh, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, right on. I think that really, I don't even have any other suggestions for something. And like I said, whatever game designer came up with that table was just absolutely ingenious. And it's probably the best solution for that I've ever seen that will apply to any area of expertise, like knowledge expertise. So, right on. Do you have any other examples, or are we closing this one up here?
No, I feel like I've said everything I needed to say.
Right on. Right on. I guess you
and
could,
maybe extra on top of that.
True that. I think you could apply the mental one, like besides technical expertise, to like mythical stuff as well. So you could have a category of like mythical. It doesn't have to be actually factual stuff. It could be
the Minotaur has escaped from the maze, and now we're all in big trouble.
Exactly, something along those lines. If you had to have some kind of mystical guru character or whatever, it would work there as well.
I think this would be an excellent one for a Doctor Who game, a random table.
Right. That could be awesome. Right on. So I think this is an awesome idea. I'm glad that we did this because I think this is one of those things that I am really big on is from gaming for over a long period of time. Sometimes you fall into these ruts and you have these kind of character archetypes you like to play, but then it's refreshing to try something new and get yourself out of those ruts to do something that you wouldn't necessarily normally do. And it's a great way to address that. So, right on. Anything else?
No.
Sounds good. All right. Well, as always, thank you guys for hanging out with us for, I guess, the 40-some minutes we're at now before editing. And as always, you can find us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix. You can find us online at JustOneMoreFix.com. And it'd be great if you guys could give us a rating and comment wherever it is that you find our podcast, whether that's iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or any of the other ones that are out there. And as always, the best way to help us out is to share us with friends that don't already listen to us that should be, because clearly if they're in your gaming group, they're already awesome and they can be made more awesome by listening to us. So other than that, I guess we will hopefully see you guys this week at Gen Con 50. Badges are actually sold out, which is crazy. First time ever that Gen Con has sold out. So I'm hopefully the crowds won't be too crazy, but still able to get around and have a great time. And hopefully we will see you guys there. Right on. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.